Good evening, all, and thank you for joining us on such a special day on our online event entitled "The UK and the EU Should Stand with Greece and Cyprus in the Face of Turkish Aggression," organized by EKO Scientists UK, a special political organization affiliated to New Democracy, the ruling party in Greece. My name is George Kratsas, and I would like to welcome our members, our keynote speaker, Denis MacShane, former Minister of Europe for the UK government, Roger Casale, former MP and CEO of the New Europeans, Michalis Arapis, the president of our organization, as well as our viewers watching on YouTube Live. Now, I would like to give the floor to our president, Michalis Arapis, to make an introduction. Michael.
Thank you very much, George. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us here tonight on this very special day for Greece. Today is our national day when we commemorate the historic OHI, or No, of the 28th of October 1940 that echoes throughout history. Today, Greece, Cyprus, and other countries are under threat again because we face a different aggressor, which this time is Turkey. As a result, our team decided to honor this momentous occasion by hosting two distinguished guests that are also proven friends of Greece. Before we introduce our guests, I would like to thank all the members of our team for their hard work and dedication in order to organize and advertise this event. Please allow me to mention individually and give my special thanks to George Kratsas, our Vice President, who will be in charge of the technical aspect tonight. Furthermore, I would like to thank Sotiris Levakos, our Officer for Planning and Technical Support, who designed the wonderful poster of this occasion. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my dear friend and mentor, Roger Casale. Roger is the founder and CEO of the civil rights organization New Europeans, an organization that I believe in and I serve as its honorary treasurer. He is a former MP and parliamentary private secretary in the Foreign Office. We are delighted to announce that Roger has already agreed to be our guest speaker on a future event about the rights of EU citizens in the UK and the developments with Brexit. So, without further ado, I give you Roger.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael, and good evening, everybody. And let me say what a pleasure it is to be with you this evening on this very special day. And I bring you my greetings as the founder of New Europeans, and greetings from our members across the world, actually, from Canada, Kiev, and from Europe, of course, and also from the United Kingdom. And we all stand with you today and say happy Oki Day, and very, very grateful to the opportunity to be with you. Thank you, Michael, George, Kyriaki, so just all the team from EKO Scientists, and looking forward very much indeed to the conversation with you and to continuing that conversation on a future occasion. And I'm very grateful for three other reasons, really. I mean, the first one is that it gives me the opportunity to tell you how valuable to New Europeans Michael Arapis has been as the Treasurer of New Europeans UK and as the President of New Europeans in Wales. And you know how much work Michael does for you and the EKO Scientists organisation, so you won't be surprised to know about the quality and the commitment of the work that he does for New Europeans, and we're very grateful for that and very grateful to you for sharing him with us. And it also gives me great pleasure to be able to see my good friend and colleague, Denis MacShane. I'm speaking to you from Italy, and I don't think I'm stealing Denis's punchline when I tell you that he's going to be speaking to you from Greece. So, but we are, and I wonder where you're all located. We know Michael's in Cardiff, and I'm sure you're a lot of you I know in the UK, but also in other places too. And we're all Europeans, and we all stand together tonight. We stand with Greece. So it's great to see Denis again. Denis is a is really an authority on European affairs. Michael, that was very kind of you to say about our relationship and how you've learned from me. I'm delighted to hear that I've learned from you. But what I want to say is that I learned a great deal from Denis MacShane when I was a young MP and I first came into the House of Commons. And I think an awful lot of people have learned from Denis MacShane, because Denis is one of the few British MPs who speaks European languages and has a profile in other EU member states out of the UK. And I think I certainly value that very, very highly. I think that's extremely important, and it's fantastic he's making time for us this evening. And the third, I look forward hugely to what he's going to say. I'm proud to say he's a friend of mine, but as Michael said, he's a friend of Greece, he's a friend of Europe, but he's a friend of Greece, and so am I. And that brings me on to my third point, which is really just to say, well, first of all, I hope you're all keeping safe and well. And these are troubled times, and in troubled times we have to stand together. And these were extremely troubled times in 1940. And what the Greek people did at that time was an inspiration. And in preparing for this evening, I found some marvelous quotes, which I'm not going to read to you because I'm sure you know them already, from people like Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt, who spoke so eloquently and quite rightly so about the heroism of the Greeks in 1940. But this isn't just about history. History is very, very important, and we great respect. We remember what happened all those years ago, 70 years ago. But I think it's 80 years ago. But I think it is extremely relevant to today and to what happens next. And I just leave you, if I may, with the words of your own president, which I entirely endorse, who I believe today in Thessaloniki said, Greece becomes stronger and overcomes every obstacle when it is united. And I think that's true of Europe as well. I think we have to stand united. We have to stand with Greece. And I look forward very much to hearing what Denis has to say about that. But you have my full support before he speaks, and you have the support of New Europeans. And as I say, we're delighted to have the opportunity to share this important celebration with you today. It does mark an important occasion, we understand that, but it is also telling us very much about what we need to do today and what we will need to do in the future. We are Europeans, and we stand with you, and we stand with Greece. Thank you very much for making me part of this evening's conversation.
Thank you very much, Roger. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm delighted to hear all of these great things that you said. I'm humbled. Now, I would like to say that it's an honor for me to introduce our main speaker for this evening, Dr. Denis MacShane, who is recognized as one of Europe's experts on the economic and geopolitical impact of Brexit and the evolution of European political processes. He was born in Glasgow and was educated at the independent St. Benedict's School in Ealing before going on to study at Merton College, Oxford. Subsequently, he completed a PhD in international economics at Birkbeck University of London. He was Minister for Europe in the Tony Blair government and served as Member of Parliament for Rotherham from 1994 until 2012. He writes regularly for UK, US, and European press, including the Greek newspaper E.K.O on European political developments. He has advised governments, businesses, and NGOs on European Union policy and processes. He has written several books on European politics. He is multilinguistic, and in addition to his native language, he speaks French, German, and Spanish. He travels regularly to European capitals in order to stay in close touch with his wide network of European political and journalist contacts. He first used the word Brexit in 2012, and in 2014 wrote a book with the title Brexit: How Britain Will Leave Europe, which predicted the outcome of the 2016 UK referendum on the UK's membership in the European Union. His latest book was published in 2019 and is called Brexiternity: The Uncertain Fate of Britain. The author argues that the impact of Brexit on the UK and Europe will last for many years. He started his life as a BBC journalist and was the youngest ever president of the National Union of Journalists. In 1975, he led the first and last strike by BBC journalists, which took BBC News off air for 24 hours. He is a well-known and proven Philhellene and supports Greece publicly through articles and interviews. He first hitchhiked to Greece as a student at Oxford in order to take part in a performance of Agamemnon at Delphi and has been going back ever since. In fact, he is there tonight. He campaigns for the return of the Parthenon sculptures to Greece, and his partner is the Greek prominent UK economist and former joint head of the United Kingdom's Government Economic Service, Vicky Pryce. Roger and Dennis, thank you very much. I will now ask Dr. MacShane, please, to address us. Thank you.
Michael, ευχαριστώ πολύ. Καλησπέρα, γεια σας everybody. Megli Kharana Ime Mazizas. Real pleasure to be here. I report to you from Varkisa, where it's been cold and raining all this Oki day, so I didn't get my swim. Dreadful, but I think the weather will be okay as always. The sun really does shine on Greece when it's needed. It was a remarkable day in 1940. Greece rose up as one against that idiot Mussolini and held him, defeated him, humiliated him, made him look a fool. So Hitler had to come down here and take the Italian spaghetti out of the bowl. And of course, with the great German Wehrmacht, it was only ever going to be a one-way result. But the historians say possibly that the bravery of the Greek soldiers delayed the launch of the attack on Russia to July, and that missing those couple of months of summer campaigning may have been what turned the tide of the history of the war, because in Russia, the answer is always never fight when the snow is falling. The moment the snow's falling, go away, go home, come back next year. And the fact that the Wehrmacht had to send some of its best troops down here, the paratroopers had to land on Crete, where if we didn't have the most stupid generals in the British Army, I think the Cretans and the British soldiers could have defeated them. But never believe, I mean, at the end of every combat, the British Army or the British soldiers find a good general, but my God, they take their time to get there. And the guys who were in charge of the British defense of Crete were not the best and the brightest. The Cretans fought absolutely magnificently again. So that's just, okay, that's part of history. And yes, indeed, I've been coming to Greece for a long, long time and tend to keep coming for as long as I can. All right, let's talk about Erdogan. Roger gave you, or Michael gave a little bit of my history. Here's some personal history on Erdogan. I love Turkey. Again, I've been going to Turkey for many years under the reigns of the colonels in the 1970s with trade union and socialist delegations. Then after that was all over. And I remember a wonderful dinner 20 years ago in Istanbul with very senior Turkish government officials, business people, publishers, And there was one man there who was really interesting. He was a publisher, and he published a book which consisted of all the obituaries, necrologies of Kemal Atatürk. And he showed it to me. There are whole pages in the Times, the New York Times, Pravda, the main French paper, the main Berlin paper. Roger, you'll be interested in this. There was a whole page about Kemal Atatürk obituary in the Evening Standard, written by Michael Foot, because Atatürk at the time was a world famous figure. He'd modernized Turkey. Yes, he'd come out of the war. Yes, the Greeks had to leave Asia Minor, but other than that, he'd done his best to take Turkey out of the Ottoman backwardness into a potential European modernity. And so they were talking, and I was very nervous because I know the reverential place that Atatürk has in Turkish iconography. You go into any bar, restaurant, hotel, there used to be his picture, sometimes very dramatic modern art pictures. And I said, well, at least you can say and he showed films of himself dancing with women to show to the mullahs and the Turkish religious people. It's quite possible for a great Turk to be seen dancing with a lady on the dance floor. Maybe the Pope could try it, and we'll see what that does for the Catholic Church. And I said, well, at least we can say, because Atatürk died very young, 57, 58, that he died very happy after lots of wine and women. And the publisher, in front of all these most senior Turks, leant across the table and said, surely, Dr. MacShane, you mean after syphilis and raki? And I thought, oh my God, if that's how they're talking about Atatürk, something is changing in Turkey. And indeed it was. I had lunch the next day with Orhan Pamuk. I'd introduced Orhan to the Turkish ambassador in London, even though he was hated by the Turkish establishment. And at the time, I thought Erdogan was going to be a good thing. Sorry, guys. Talking about, he was mayor of Istanbul. He'd been very dynamic in Istanbul, modernized the city. He was pro-business. He was talking about Muslim democracy like one would talk about Christian democracy in Germany or Austria or in other European countries. That is what, I don't speak Turkish, that's what we all thought of him. And I've got many friends in the CHP, the Turkish Republican Party, the main opposition, Social Democratic Party. And he was prime minister, and he wanted to modernize Turkey. He wanted to make it more open to the economy. He wanted to develop economic, cultural, other ideas. Yes, we knew he was a conservative, for God's sake, conservative Muslim. That's okay. I mean, there are plenty of the great Christian democratic founding fathers of Europe who in their personal lives were very conservative, even reactionary. Doesn't matter. They understood that religion couldn't control the state anymore after 1945. And so I was there with Tony Blair in 2004 when we twisted the arms of the leaders of Europe to at least start discussions with Turkey. I always told Tony there's going to be a huge problem with Cyprus, but I never forgot the prime minister who authorized the invasion of Cyprus in 1974 was Bülent Ecevit, who was the head of the Social Democratic Party, who was a translator of T.S. Eliot. I mean, I couldn't believe at the time that a man who translated T.S. Eliot was willing, even conceiving of launching a full-scale military assault on Cyprus. My own belief, and I was there at the time, I went out to Cyprus, 74, 75, 76, a lot of solidarity support work, that if we'd had good leadership in Britain at the time, if Harold Wilson, and above all the Foreign Secretary, Jim Callaghan, had simply authorized British soldiers to leave Akrotiri and the other sovereign bases there in armored cars and vehicles. I mean, they weren't a big unit. I mean, they didn't have tanks or artillery. But if they got up in armored cars and just formed a tripwire line, you couldn't stop the Turks arriving on Cyprus. A, they had a right as a guarantor power. B, the fall of the colonels in 1974 unleashed horrible, extreme right-wing passions in Cyprus. Too many people here listening to this will know this far more than I do. And there was a lot of brutality, there was violence. The Turks had a right to defend the Turkish communities there, but not then, in the second invasion, to fan out and occupy, what, a third of the island, going into Belapaish, going into Famagousta, going into places that got nothing to do with Turkish presence on Cyprus. So if British soldiers had gone there as a tripwire and said to the Greek Cypriots, stop the killing, get back, these are Turkish villages, and said to the Turks, you go home to Turkey and we'll have an international UN force to ensure that there's no killing of any sort, but you do not fully occupy the island, maybe something could have happened. But frankly, all my life, I've watched politicians very frightened to intervene and not willing to take responsibility. And Callaghan, I'm afraid, was like that, especially with Henry Kissinger in Washington, backing obviously the most reactionary elements out of the sheer terror that any democracy in Greece or anywhere else instantly meant communism, communism, communism. That's not true. The Greek people are not communist, nor the Cypriots, nor the people in Italy or France, but the Americans had no real understanding of what was going on. Anyway, to cut that story short, so here's Erdogan, and we're saying to the rest of Europe, help us get us in. I think Simitis, the PASOK guy, was prime minister at the time. But as far as I know from talking to friends in Neue Demokratia, they weren't that hostile at that stage to at least talking to Erdogan. We had the earthquake diplomacy initiated by Papandreou, which worked quite well. And, you know, I've never sensed any direct hostility on the part of any political grouping in Greece, right or left, against Turkey as such, just a search for good relations. So off we went, but bit by bit, it just started going wrong. So, for example, you had the Kofi Annan plan for Cyprus, and the Turks went up to the Swiss mountains. Erdogan came out and said, this is the biggest victory that Turkey has ever won in its entire hundreds of years of history without the use of force, without using arms. And I sat there in my office as a minister in England going, oh, for God's sake, Erdogan, you just blown it. No Cypriot's going to vote for this after this stupid statement. You should have come out and say, oh, this is terrible. This is a big victory for Cyprus. All the Cypriots will won. Oh, Turkey will cooperate. But he is, I'm afraid, so arrogant. And bit by bit, it became clear he had no real interest in solving any of the problems to which he could have been a solution. He insisted on being a problem. I met other big AKP people like Abdullah Gül, who was the president, the current foreign minister, Cemiliotis, when he was on the Council of Europe. Personally, I liked them quite well. I mean, I didn't really get to meet Erdogan a lot personally. But it soon became clear that the driving force behind Erdogan's existence on earth, it's a bit like Jarosław Kaczynski in Poland. For him, it's ultra-Catholicism and this horrible decision denying women the right to control their own bodies. For Erdogan, it's Islam. And I was talking to a European foreign minister a couple of months back who said he'd been with Erdogan for 45 minutes at the United Nations, the General Assembly. It hasn't been held this year for obvious reasons. Last year, he was with his boss, the Prime Minister. And there you get these endless, they're called bilaterals. It doesn't matter what's said in the plenary. It's all the meetings in the delegation offices. And Erdogan's there for the 45 minutes, and he spends 35 minutes talking about religion, about Islam. And I think we have got to start from a basic understanding that Erdogan's driving force is the reconquest of Islam as the dominant religion, I'd say, in the entire world. It's a bit crazy, far-fetched. He wants to be the acknowledged leader of Muslims around the world, and in particular, he wants to restore the influence and role that Islam had, thanks to force of arms, between the late 900 after Christ and right through to when Greece started the great liberation fight of 200 years ago next year, culminating in the conflicts at the beginning of this century. And when you're dealing with a religious fanatic, I'm afraid the normal rules of statecraft, of compromise, of doing the best for your country go out the window. And the AK party, Erdogan's party, it's a petty bourgeois party representing the growing rural Anatolian bourgeoisie, and it's done very well. I mean, I want to see people driving cars. I want to see people owning their houses. I want to see the professions of medicine, of dentistry, of architecture, of consultancy advice, of lawyers growing. I want to see the most modern technology. I mean, that every day that somebody adds a bit of value to their own personal wealth and creativity is a good day for the country in which they live. You can have an argument about taxation and distribution, or the rest of it, or in the case of Greece, sometimes not paying taxes, but we're not getting into that, I don't think, tonight. And Erdogan really supported those ideas. And he has a giant military. The Turkish army is enormous. There are 2 full divisions stationed in Cyprus. I doubt if the British army could put 2 full divisions anywhere into action anywhere in the world without waiting about 2 years to train them. An air force, out-of-date airplanes a bit, but it's strong. And so he then, then it just starts. I can't quite really examine the timeline that well, into, frankly, a very aggressive set of posturing in this region. It's not just aggressive, it's dangerous. I heard my dear old friend François Hollande, the former president of France, on the French radio this morning. Sadly, I don't speak Greek, so I can't listen to Greek radio, so I have to listen to French radio instead. And there he was, being interviewed about Erdogan, saying, but this man is so dangerous. He has launched military interventions in Syria, military interventions in Libya, now a military intervention in Azerbaijan. Of course, Turkey may have its political diplomatic position on who to like in Libya, or who to support in Syria, or whether to support Armenians or Azeris in the current conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh and the Armenia-Azerbaijan fighting. But you don't send your soldiers in there, or you don't send mercenaries in there, who are actually what Erdogan does. You don't send your drones, you don't send other military hardware, or if you do, then be very clear, you're going to make the situation far worse, and you're going to worry all your neighbors. I mean, the huge success of Europe since 1945 is that the European Union has been Europe's greatest project for peace ever in 2.5 millennia. I mean, I consider it a miracle. My father had to go and fight at the beginning of the Second World War, was wounded, shot, and uncle died on the Atlantic Ocean in a Royal Navy ship guarding the oil coming in to Britain. And probably uncle or great-grandfathers before that had to fight in different wars. It is literally a miracle that on the whole, we have seen no serious armed conflict on the European continent for the first time in 2,000 years. And Erdogan is destabilizing all of that. You know better than I do the aggression in the Eastern Mediterranean, sending in an oil drilling ship protected by Turkish naval vessels to carry out some early exploration in what are clearly delimited Greek national waters. I mean, let's be quite clear. People don't understand this. Greece is a mainland nation where we are, but it's also an island nation. It is as much defined by Crete or by Hydra or by Kefalonia or by Skiros as it is by Attica or Thrace or Macedonia. And so that is the essence of the essentialism of Greece. Turkey isn't. Turkey is a giant landmass country with huge fertile agricultural possibilities, with giant cultural centers. I mean, let's be quite clear. Istanbul is Europe, arguably, I put it possibly even Europe's greatest cultural heritage center. I mean, I don't mean to be rude to Athens. I could walk up from here and see the Parthenon from a hill just above, behind the house. But Athens to Istanbul is, you know, it's Edinburgh to London. And Erdogan is on top of that country and is driving it economically into the ground. I mean, the lira has lost 25% of its value this year. It's trading at 8 to the dollar. Only yesterday, you could the lira could get a lot more. You know, two liras would buy a dollar. You're now finding ordinary Turks facing very serious inflationary problems because prices go up when your currency goes down. People can't buy insulin. An awful lot of Turks have got loans from family members or relatives who have emigrated or are workers, legal workers in Germany or in Switzerland or in France. And over there, they take out a loan to send back to Istanbul or wherever in order to allow the Turkish end of the family to buy a house. I mean, that's a very good thing. It's an act of family solidarity. But the poor people in Turkey who've signed for this loan for, I don't know, sort of 50,000 euros or whatever, now find that the interest rates they're paying in lira have, you know, gone up 4 or 5-fold. So the real sense that Turkey isn't going right, yes, I mean, I actually have sympathy with Erdogan on armed aggression by Kurdish militants. I think that one of the things he did early in his period as chief of Turkey was to allow greater language rights, no, not to recognize the Kurds as a separate nation. If ever that happens, it will come later. I mean, one feels sorry for to some extent for the Kurds, but you can't bomb and kill your way to nationhood any longer. He's even had some indirect contacts with Öcalan, the PKK leader, but unfortunately the madness of the intervention in Syria to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, again, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of Bashar al-Assad, I'm not a fan of Colonel Gaddafi, certainly wasn't a fan of Saddam Hussein, but I wasn't a fan of General Pinochet in Chile. I wasn't a fan of the apartheid regime who arrested me when I was campaigning with in South African black independent trade unions in the 1980s. I wasn't a fan of your colonels when I was a very young man, but not for a second would I propose sending in a giant military force, kinetic bombs, planes, tanks to overthrow them. At times, you just have to be patient. You have to wait for the colonels to sort of collapse in on top of themselves. You have to wait for Franco to die. There's a lovely story they tell in Madrid, one of my favorite cities, of Franco on his deathbed. And all the people of Madrid come to the Moncloa, that's the Prime Minister's house in Madrid, and they're all there, kind of cheerful, willing him, wanting to send him to heaven, saying he should go and meet his creator, his God, as soon as possible. And Franco sort of hears a noise from the outside and says to his aide, who are these people? Caudillo, it is all of Spain. They have come to say goodbye. Well, why? Where are they going? And I think you just have to have that kind of patience sometimes with dictators, because every armed invention from the north, I prefer that term to the west, in a majority Muslim country in the last 40 years, the Russians going into Afghanistan, us going into Afghanistan, then into Iraq, then into Libya, then into Syria, it's turned into a disaster. But Erdogan went in to fight on the wrong side, to be honest. In Libya, I'm not a genius in deciding between General Haftar and the Tripoli government, which is recognized by the UN, but Turkey shouldn't be there. They certainly shouldn't be there. In Azerbaijan, very difficult situation, doesn't need somebody coming in and throwing his weight around to prove his point. I don't know what happened in Turkey in 2015 with the famous attempted coup. It was serious, it was real, and a lot of Turkish friends also were very upset and angry because they like to think, as you all do, that they live in a country under some form of rule of law. Maybe it's a bit right-wing, but whatever, but rule of law. And here suddenly were putschists intervening to try and kill the, whatever you think about it, the elected prime minister, by then president of the country. But that doesn't excuse the mass incarceration of journalists. There are more journalists in prison in Turkey than any other country in the world. And so Erdogan, I think, has let us all down. I remember my friend Michel Rocard, great French social democrat, great prime minister of France, brilliant man, writing a book in 2012 in favor of Turkey joining the EU. I'd moved on from then, but there was that sense amongst many progressive forces in Europe, especially supported by Boris Johnson. And every time I wrote an article 20 years ago in favor of Turkey joining the EU, Boris would immediately put it in The Spectator, because he has a very soft spot for Turkey. We all know about his great-grandfather. So, I mean, Boris is a Turkophile. And as I say, so am I, but not under present conditions. That's why it is so important that we accept the analysis, I think, of President Hollande, that Turkey is a real and present menace to the peace of Europe. He's the biggest challenge that Europe faces. I mean, Putin is a pig, but he's a Russian pig, and on the whole, he stays in Russia. Maybe he takes Crimea and puts it in his pocket. And he sends a lot of cyber warfare, he sends agents out to sort of kill Navalny and kill other people. But I don't think Putin welcomes peace. It's very interesting. He's now supporting Biden to be president. So he's come off the Trump bandwagon already. But Erdogan does menace us all. He interferes in the domestic politics of big European countries. Not Michael, not in Wales, not in England, but In Germany, he goes and makes huge speeches saying you don't have to be loyal to Germany. You're still Turkish. Forget about your German orientation. That's crap. And those kids are born in Germany. They're going to grow up German as much as Roger with an Italian background grew up British. Me with a Polish-Irish background grew up British. That is an awful thing to say. He's going to France and doing the same thing, directly interfering in domestic politics. And now the latest outrages, all of France is in shock at the murder of the school teacher Samuel Paty. Teachers in France of huge symbolic importance. And he was teaching a class about freedom of information, and he showed the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. He said to all the Muslim children, students in the class, please leave in case you might be upset. Or he wasn't approving of them. I mean, I remember 30, 40 years ago, there was a scandal in England over some painting in a big pub gallery showing Christ on the cross with an erection. I was a Catholic. Did I like that? No. Was I felt a bit sick? Yes. Did I think you should kill the guy who did it? No. Just laugh at it, ignore it, it goes away. But this chap showed these things. Unfortunately, Erdogan is a Muslim brother. He supports Islamism. And the Islamists back in Syria, in ISIS, got involved in this and instructed one of their guys, a Chechen, to go and kill in the most horrible way, cut off the head of this teacher. And all of France is in complete and utter shock. Everybody stands in solidarity, except, of course, Erdogan. And when Macron makes a speech saying we must defend freedom of speech, must defend liberty of expression, and it's not aimed at Muslims, but yes, Islamism, the ideological expression of extreme Islam, is a threat to us all. We must stand against it. Erdogan insults him and says he's mental, mad, and says there should be a boycott of all French goods sold in Turkey. I mean, I've got a lot of Turkish friends. You tell them to stop drinking French wine and champagne and they'll be very, very upset. But there's Erdogan. And today we saw him get on a plane with Mrs. Erdogan with her head covering on. And she's carrying a large, handsome leather bag. And it's a bag made by Hermes, the most expensive shop for accessories in France. Buy a tie there, it's a minimum of 300 euros. God knows what the bank. And there you go. Come on, Erdogan, talk to Mrs. Erdogan and get her off all this French stuff. But this is
very sorry if you don't mind me interrupting.
Questions. Let's go to questions.
I think that's very, very interesting that that you are also giving us an insight into your experiences, not just as a political person, but also as a European. Through your contacts, through your experiences, you've lived in various countries, Turkey, Greece as well, and Cyprus. And I think that's really, really captivating. Thank you so much for it. And if you don't mind us moving on to the next.
Sure. Let's do that.
Yeah, so you will be delighted to know we have received a lot of questions on our social media from our members. So we have categorized and selected a few of them that we will read in alternation. They will be read by our two officers. So that's Dr. Kiki Sonidu, who is our secretary, and our officer for Women's Affairs, Maria Dimitra Garipi. So Kiki, you may proceed, and then Maria will then ask a follow-up question.
Good evening, Dr. MacShane. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And thank you for your inspiring talk, I have to say. The first question I would like to ask, it comes from Helen, who is a member of our organization, and it was sent on Twitter. It is in the relation to the tension in the Aegean Sea. Are you concerned about the Turkish aggression? And do you think that the Turkish side might escalate it in the next few weeks?
I'm very concerned, and I think Europe should stand much more firmly with President Macron taking a lead. There's a huge problem in Germany. where I heard Sigmar Gabriel, the former German Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister, Social Democrat, here in Greece actually last month. And he said, the problem with European Union foreign policy is it's vegetarian, and the problem with German foreign policy is it's vegan. In other words, it just doesn't want to bite. I hope that's changing now because of Erdogan's absurd aggression against Macron. Of course, it's deeply sinister. I mean, a French naval vessel, I don't know if it bumped into or nearly had some contact with a Turkish naval vessel. This is crazy. As President Hollande said this morning on radio, we have to reconsider Turkish membership of the Atlantic Alliance, that's NATO. Turkey's buying the most sophisticated air defense system from Russia, which is illegal under the NATO treaty. You're only meant to buy equipment from other NATO allies. So in every way, he is violating the obligations of being a NATO member. Will he go that far? You don't know. I mean, Turkey is breaking down economically, and the best way to take people's minds off economic problems and disaster is, of course, to try and launch a patriotic, nationalist, a bit of military aggression. That said, I find it hard to believe any senior Turkish military officer or any senior state functionary or even senior politicians would want to go that far. But you can't rule it out. And the best way to stop it is for Europe as one, including the United Kingdom, to say on the anniversary of the Greek War of National Liberation and Independence next year, I hope COVID allows proper celebrations, we'll see, then Greece is as much a part of Europe and as much a part of everything we need to defend and show solidarity with.
Thank you. Thank you. And Maria, please, you may proceed.
Okay, so dear Dr. MacShane, good evening. I would like to thank you as well for your talk and your support towards our country. So the question comes from our youth officer, George Sotiropoulos, and is about the ongoing war in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. So what are your predictions about the outcome of this conflict? Do you share the concerns of many Greeks that if a similar situation arose against us in Greece or Cyprus, we will be desperately alone as the proud people of Armenia?
Well, let's be quite clear. The proud people of Armenia did use their military power to occupy a lot of Azeri territory. Not all. In the breakup of the communist Soviet Union, of which Armenia and Azerbaijan were republics within that. And in all that chaos of 1991, 1992, in Nagorno-Karabakh, there's clearly a strong element of Armenian territory, but it is on Azeri territory. It's a bit like, say, in Kosovo, you can find areas that are fully populated by Serbs, but they're Kosovo. Just as in Cyprus, there are areas that are completely Turkish villages and communities. And if I may say so, had Cyprus behaved between 1960 and 1974, as I think Cyprus behaves now, there would be a solution. Just as Greece has found a way to undo the North Macedonia question initiated by the last government, but also supported by Prime Minister Mitsotakis and Foreign Minister Dendias. And we salute their leadership because I know the passion of people in Greece about the whole issue of Macedonia. So I don't think we should stand with anybody. The Turks and the Armenians have, shall we say, an interesting relationship going back to 1915, and the passions of that have not died away. But you just don't need a war. All military conflict makes matters worse. There's no great, Armenia is not being threatened, Azerbaijan is not being threatened, Nagorno-Karabakh, with its mixture of purely Armenian areas, but also quite a lot of genuinely Azeri territory, is weak. But I think certainly Joe Biden comes in, I met him, he's very experienced in international affairs. I think he will mobilize. And Mr. Putin wants to sell arms to both the Azeris and the Armenians, so he'll try and slow it down. And the Turks are just showing off their drones. But believe me, there are anti-drone weapons that can arrive quite fast, if necessary, and blow those Turkish drones out of the sky. So the best thing is to go back to the status quo before. It's messy, but at least people aren't being killed. Now, I wouldn't advise Greece to take big sides on either side of this debate. If I'm not going to tell, Oscar Wilde said there's only one thing worse than advice, and that's good advice. So I'm not going to give good advice, any advice, but I'd say to any friend in the Greek government, don't get involved too closely in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh.
That's some wise words spoken by Denis there. I think we're on our follow-up questions from Kiki. I think we don't have Kiki right now on our panel. I think she may have been cut off online. Maria, would you be able to just go on with a follow-up question until Kiki joins back?
Of course. So the next question is, Dr. MacShane, well, this question comes from Kiki Sonidou. As a follow-up, do you think that the international community and the UK specifically should do more in order to recognize the Armenian genocide? This is a very important issue that is very close to Kiki's heart, actually, since our ancestors were survivors of the genocide of the Greeks of Pontus and Asia Minor. As we know, you are a great friend of our key ally Israel. Therefore, what steps do you believe that should be taken in order for the UK and the EU to show solidarity on the subject, as they rightly recognize the Holocaust, to recognize accordingly this monstrosity that took place a century ago?
Okay. Well, I remember all the difficulties when France adopted a resolution defining Armenia as genocide. It's also a big story in America. I'm not sure what the US Congress has done. At the time, it's kind of still a bit my opinion. There were terrible massacres, deaths in Bengal, in India in 1943. Between 2 or 3 million Bengalis were allowed to starve to death because the British government would not release grain and wheat stored in Calcutta, Bengal is around Calcutta, because they wanted to keep it, they thought, for their soldiers fighting against the Japanese. Now, there was plenty of grain and food ships coming in from Australia and New Zealand. The Pacific and Indian Oceans by then were under the control of the Royal Navy, the American Navy. There was no real threat from Japanese submarines. And lots of food was coming in, but they kept the supply, they just allowed them to die. And we don't see that as a terrible crime. In Amritsar in 1920, the British colonel in charge against an Indian demonstration told his men to open with their machine guns. About 1,000 Indians were killed. You go to India and they think Churchill is a Holocaust merchant, a genocidist. I don't think he was, but some very cruel things happened. It's completely different from the Holocaust, when all the technology, the industry, the transport infrastructure, the chemical industry of a giant sophisticated state was all dedicated to one thing: transporting and killing people on account of their race. You saw that in a small way at Srebrenica in Bosnia, when 8,000 European Muslims, Bosnians, men and some boys were taken out and killed by Serbs. They came with exactly the right number of handcuffs, exactly the right number of bullets for their rifles, coffee breaks, bulldozers to dig the graves. Now, in Turkey, the Armenian mass deaths, the Turks behaved abominably in a situation of great war. Roger will know the story of the Irish famine, of the people allowed to, a million who died in Ireland in 1848. Did they do it in an organized, deliberate way? Did they want to, you can't take, if their object was to sort of stop Armenia existing, it didn't work, did it? So that said, I'd say leave it to historians. And one day, the British still won't apologize for that Bengal famine that killed many people. One day the Turks, when they're a bigger, more confident people, will admit that what happened there under the remnants of the Ottoman regime, it shouldn't be forgotten, was a great crime against humanity. But I don't think you're going to find the British Parliament or the German Parliament or Italian Parliament. Has the Greek Parliament passed a motion on Armenian genocide? Does anybody know? I'm asking Greek friends. I don't know. All right. Well, next question, Kiki or Maria.
Dr. MacShane. Okay. Obviously, unfortunately, there is a slight technical problem with Kiki. We're she's trying to get connected, but there is a problem with Zoom. So I will read the next question, which comes from our member, John, from Twitter, and it's on a different subject altogether. As you are an expert on Brexit, and this was something that you predicted prior to the referendum, what are your thoughts and predictions about the future? Are you hopeful about the outcome of the ongoing negotiations? Because time is running out and we are all very much concerned.
Yes, well, I talk to Michel Barnier regularly. He's a personal friend, but I go to Brussels. I haven't been since March because of all the lockdowns. And I remember Michel telling me that Boris Johnson came to see him last year, the summer of last year, or autumn 2019, September, and said, Michel, you're a politician, I'm a politician, I need a deal. Give me a deal. So I gave him a deal. I gave him what actually I'd offered to Mrs. Theresa May, but she refused it because she was so frightened of the extremists in Northern Ireland. Johnson managed to turn the whole thing around and present it as a great victory of his negotiating brilliance. And the Northern Irish shut up, and the Tories shut up, and the people who hated May shut up, and they passed it through the Parliament, the House of Commons, and then he went on to win his big election. So, it's quite a good idea. I mean, in politics, you always have to learn to do U-turns, what I call the Johnson pirouette. I always see him as a ballet dancer, a rather fat ballet dancer, but one who can turn and swerve and turn round. Now, I think right now that's happening. But that said, he is much, much weaker because of the very unfortunate way, I don't want to get into Johnson bashing, way he's handled the COVID crisis and the entire government has. So he's got open revolt by Conservative MPs, and he'll be very nervous to add another revolt because any kind of deal he brings back will be a defeat for the ultra Brexit position. It won't be what Roger and I would like, and maybe many of the friends listening in would like, but it would be a step back. It would be acknowledging Britain has to have a continuing relationship with Europe. And so that's why I call my book Brexiternity. This is just the beginning. It's going to last an eternity. The Swiss voted not to join the EU in 1992. They started negotiation with the EU. They're still negotiating in 2020. And that may be our future. Endless negotiations on this, that. I've got time. It's a whole discussion, all the problems to do with data exchange, 1,000,001 things that govern the way we live, which won't be solved even with a technical deal that says no tariffs on cars and no quotas. I mean, that's a good thing, but it doesn't solve the problem of rules of origin and other compliances that will just delay and clog up trade, I would predict very long queues at Dover and Calais on the 1st of January next year, whatever happens. But I don't see a total walkout, crash out, but I can't be sure because this is all in Boris Johnson's head. This is all about the internal politics of the Conservative Party. Everybody else, the CBI, the British Chambers of Commerce, the Scottish government, the Welsh government, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, they're completely out of the picture. This is all what is happening in Mr. Johnson's head. And right now, I think he's a very confused man who in his heart knows that he was a brilliant polemical journalist, a wonderful, amusing speaker, a very warm person when you meet him, but he doesn't have the grip and the hard work to be a head of government of a country that's going through a very, very difficult period.
It's very sad prospect, but unfortunately, it's a realistic one. Roger, would you also like to contribute on this topic? Would you have anything to add?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to respond to that question. And the first thing I would like to say is that everybody listening to this on the panel and on YouTube should really get hold of a copy of Denis's book, Brexiternity, because it really is an authority on the subject, and I can highly recommend it. And as Michael rightly said, Denis got it right last time. I wonder whether he's got it right this time, but it's certainly worth looking at the arguments in his book and reading it. I think he's right in that it will seem like eternity, but I'm not sure that it will actually take to eternity. I think there's only one way that this is going to end, which is with Britain rejoining the European Union at some point in the future. And in the meantime, we're going to be treated to this terrible record on repeat, which is really rather unbearable to listen to, and so I don't think I'm going to contribute to it further. But in terms of the very short term, I don't know. I mean, I think Denis has pointed to really what the problem is here, which is the ultra-conservatives. There is absolutely nothing that Boris Johnson can give to the ultra-conservatives that is anyway going to keep them happy. But the trouble with people like that, and it's really interesting to reflect on what Denis has said to us about Erdogan and fanatics. You know, it's not about persuasion anymore. It's not about respecting agreements. It's just about naked power and getting what you want. And the problem is, and I just make this point, that the Conservative Party, it isn't really the Conservative Party anymore. I mean, to my mind, a traditional Conservative would be concerned about the integrity of the British state, but you know, we're going to see Scottish independence, I think, and they seem to be government seems to be unconcerned about that, and that's unusual for Conservatives. I think they're not really Conservatives; they're revolutionaries. And what's happened, Denis will bear this out, over the last 20, 30 years, probably longer, so the Conservative Party has been overtaken from the grassroots by fanatics, and on the whole, they're men. They are, of course, middle class, like Denis and myself, and so on. That's nothing wrong with that. But they are quite elderly, and they have these really bizarre views. And so, if you were a moderate conservative, pro-European, you wouldn't be able to get selected as a parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party anymore. You used to be said that at Conservative selection meetings you had to turn up with your wife, you had to be straight and you had to be married. But for that's not the case anymore. I mean, they've changed, and that's good. But what you do have to turn up with is your rampant zealot views about being a Eurosceptic. Otherwise, you're not going to stand a chance. And you might say, and you know, not only are all the young MPs Eurosceptic because they wouldn't have been selected as candidates otherwise. What's happened in the last 12 months, we'll say, unfortunately, is that those with more experience, who have more sensible, rational, more close to the centre views, have been thrown out. So I think that it's going to take a while for this drama inside the Conservative Party to play itself out. But there's only one place going to end for the Conservative Party, which is in badly. And I hope where it ends for the country is coming back to the centre, and that will mean coming back to its senses and coming back eventually one day to the European Union. But Britain is going to continue to suffer enormously in terms of influence. And from this side of the English Channel, we're going to have lots more boring conversations about Brexit, that's for sure, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think we have gone well over time, and we don't want the kindness.
If you are happy to stay for a few more minutes, we'll have 2 more questions.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
If that's fine with you, okay, great. Who would like to go? Is it Maria, or who do you suggest?
Is Kiki here?
Oh, yes.
Otherwise, Maria, if she's here, she will read it.
She's here. So you may ask the question, Kiki, as we have missed you the last few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've asked you to unmute, so you.
Oh, okay, fine. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, we had an internet failure because of heavy rain, so I missed the most important question I wanted to make. But I'll ask you the next one, Dr. MacShane. This comes from Peter. He's somebody who's watching us live, and it's in the interest to Greeks and Philhellenes worldwide. It is in the relation to the return of the Parthenon sculptures to Greece. And on behalf of everyone, we would like to thank you for your support on this matter, which is greatly appreciated. And as we commemorate the centenary since the birth of a great Greek actress and politician, well-known, Melina Mercouri, who found a lot about this for many years, is it finally time, you think, for the UK authorities to do the honorable thing and return them to their birthplace where they belong, in Athens?
Kiki, I would like to think so. Lord Elgin, of course, came from a Scottish peerage. He had very bad syphilis, and he was known as Nosy because his nose fell off because of his sort of disgusting behavior. He is one of the most revolting creatures that's ever crawled out from the aristocratic underworld in Britain. And it still shames me that you could have directors of the British Museum, the chairman of the board, Sir Richard Owen, the former editor of the Financial Times, defending this act of unbelievable vandalism, as if somebody came to Stonehenge in 1800 and sort of say, well, I'll take that pillar and that tomb and take them back somewhere else. Coming back to Greece, there isn't, unless we have a prime minister who really believes in it. I mean, Mr. Johnson claims he's a classicist. I think he's even written a book about Rome and Greece, but he shows no interest in that. If there's a Scottish government, perhaps they might disown the behaviour of one of their former aristocrats. I'm not sure. It's an absurd story. President Macron has made big speeches about returning the plundered booty from countries that France, in its imperial heyday, occupied. We just have to keep up the pressure, and I don't really expect Mr. Mitsotakis or the Greek culture minister to go into it big time, and I'm just ashamed, frankly. I mean, they're stuck in that boring room in the basement of the British Museum. When it was open, that room, the Duveen room, they actually took the marbles and took bleach and wire brushes and sort of tried to clean them to make them white again, having no idea that, of course, Greek temples were never white. They were very colourful. They had to stand up to the whole population. No, it's sorry. I mean, if you're British and proud of being British, there are some very, very bad spots in our history, and the looting and the plundering of the Parthenon is certainly one of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Maria, I believe you have one final question addressed to both Dennis and Roger.
Yes, I do. So the final question comes from our president, Michael Arapis, and is in relation to Brexit. The Greek community in the UK exceeds the 120,000, and the Greek-Cypriot community exceeds the 400,000. Overall, around 5-6 million EU citizens live in the UK. While a lot of people have already acquired British citizenship and as dual citizens feel safe, millions of others have not, and as a result are reasonably worried and concerned. What would you advise the UK government to do, and what do you think that it should be done in order to guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK and the rights of UK citizens in the EU?
Well, this is one of the saddest aspects of Brexit, because there are hundreds of thousands, if not more than that, into the million or so, who just don't know, who are worried, who are fearful. Elderly people who retired to France or Spain, or I guess here to Greece in their 50s, teachers who took early retirement, policemen, shopkeepers who sold up, and they retired and they had a wonderful time. They built a house, they created a community. Now they're late 70s, they're 80, they're getting old, they've got cancer, they've got heart problems. And suddenly they're losing so many rights and they don't know what to do. Do they come home? Oh, they're happy to see out their days in the warmth and friendship of all the people around them. An interesting development just today is that Gibraltar and Madrid, I don't know if you know about this, Roger, are holding talks with a view to allowing freedom of movement to continue between Gibraltar and Spain, because most of the British citizens who work in Gibraltar is simply, if you like, it's like a slightly bigger version of the Acropolis. It's just a big, big rock and not much land around it. And so all the people who work as civil servants, professionals, teachers, they all live in Spain next door, where they can have a little house and a swimming pool. A swimming pool in Andalusia is not a luxury, it's an essential to survive the summer. And then they cross into Gibraltar, easy. But if they are EU citizens, British citizens, and they don't have EU citizenship, their cars can be inspected all the time. So the queues will go on for hours. So the idea is, it's a brief report in the Financial Times, that Spain says freedom of movement will continue. Gibraltar accepts that they would have to live under EU rules. Spain will not claim sovereignty over Gibraltar. I mean, it's one of the long issues in Spain. So it's a kind of modus vivendi. But when I tweeted this out, I got so many tweets saying, well, if they can do it for the British citizens who live and work in Gibraltar, why can't they do it for me? Why can't they do it for us? And I think finally, I hope, Roger has done such great work on this, but Roger will know from his political experience, until something happens to you, you may read about it, but you don't make a political fuss. Nobody in Britain in 1939 or 40 believed the Second World War had started until the German panzer tanks were at Dunkirk and the bombs were falling on London. They said, oh yeah, I think we're in a war. We better do something about it, hadn't we? And until, I'm afraid, these kind of pressures, people suddenly have to start coming home, and their children say to their MP, why you made my mum and dad come home? They were old, they were happy living on the Spanish coast in the Dordogne near Bordeaux. Why are you forcing them to come home? So that's why I call about Brexiternity. I agree with Roger. Best would for it never to have happened. Second best would be maybe a Norway relationship. But double plus best would be to return. I just don't think, Roger, that's particularly on the cards right now, especially not with our party, but we can discuss that privately over a drink in secret. So, Maria, I just think keep writing to MPs, to keep protesting, keep holding demonstrations, all the boring ways you affect political change. And you know, British people aren't that stupid or dumb. I mean, they know we need nurses in our hospitals, we need Europeans in our care homes, we need specialist workers, we need Greeks to run anything to do with shipping and insurance. I mean, our Nobel Prize winner, he's a Greek Cypriot, for Christ's sake. But the British think he's one of theirs because he was at LSE. So just keep going at it. It is an absolutely, we could have changed our internal rules to manage freedom of movement 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. We didn't do it because the ministers were so short-sighted and stupid, and we created a monster that's going to cause us an awful lot of trouble.
Thank you, Dennis. And Roger, a few words?
Thank you. Yes. Well, just to be clear, I don't think Britain is going to rejoin anytime soon, although that would obviously be the best solution for Greeks and EU citizens in the UK and British citizens in the EU by far. I think 10, 20, 30, who knows, it's going to be a very long time. But I do think I was actually the last person out the door of Europe House in James Square on the 31st of January when they closed the door. And I hope to be the first person back in when they reopen. That's my ambition. But I also hope that we will see a Prime Minister who not only takes Britain back into the European Union, but yes, renames the British Museum the British Swag Bag and sends the Elgin marbles back to where they belong. But on the specific issue raised, I mean, I think it was very interesting, Dennis mentioning Gibraltar, because we often said the Irish issue in Northern Ireland is something that can't be resolved, and the Gibraltar thing I think is even more complicated, even more challenging. And I think it's also true what Dennis has said about people you don't realise what you've got until it's gone. And there's as Dennis has so eloquently told us, it wasn't until the bombs were raining down in London, the Blitz, people realised there was a war on. It wasn't until the exit polls were announced on 23rd of June 2016 that people suddenly started to think about, I wonder what would happen if Britain left the European. I wonder what would happen if Britain left the European Union. And we know that internet searches in the UK for the words European Union spiked at midnight on the 23rd of June 2016, 2 hours after polls had closed and had been announced that Britain was probably leaving. But just as Dennis foresaw that Britain would leave the European Union, I think we started Europeans in 2013 because we asked ourselves the question, what would happen to the 5 million if Britain were to leave the European Union? Who are the 5 million? That's the 3.4, 3.6, probably more, a million EU citizens in the UK and their counterparts in the EU. And we've always taken the position that you have to protect their rights. I mean, I think people will wake up to just how drastic it is for them, what it means for them. As Dennis said, it's not until it impacts your life that you already realise. But if there isn't a deal and Britain comes to the end of the transition and people want to go on their summer holidays next year, if they're allowed to travel, then I think it will dawn on them that something has, and they won't be able to use their electronic passports and so on. I think they're to be fast-tracked. I think they'll realise that something has changed. I think if a lot of elderly people come back from south of Spain because they can't afford to live there anymore. I mean, Nigel Farage used to talk about the invasion from Bulgaria, and so, I mean, it was always a sort of cheap joke and being offensive and racist always pay dividends for him, unfortunately. But I said, well, never mind about the invasion from Bulgaria. What about the invasion from the Costa Brava, when hundreds of thousands of British pensioners can't afford to live there anymore? And how are we going to look after them? They won't have property in the UK. There'll be a cost on the NHS. I think when we start to see these type of longer term consequences, I think it will start to bite home. But Mike's question, what do you do? I mean, how long have you got? I'll keep it very, very short. I mean, we have been saying from before the referendum and all the way through, you don't do what's been going on, which is the bargaining chip business that Michel Barnier, Bennett's friend Michel Barnier, who's a very good guy, I know him as well, has been involved in, you don't get into a situation which unfortunately we got into, which is where you trade off one set of rights against another. You simply say, look, we're going to treat this group as one group of people, the 5 million, and we are going to say that it would be unfair for their life to change in any way at all as a result of the Brexit vote. So we create a register effectively, we give them a card, we say green card for Europe, and we create the equivalent status to the status of an EU citizen living in another EU member state, so that their rights are entirely safeguarded and ring-fenced for that particular group of people. That hasn't happened, and now we realise that despite the USS and all the things that are being put into place, something like that was needed. That's why there's been a campaign for a physical document for EU citizens in the UK. That's why we've got this stuff coming out now about freedom of movement in Gibraltar. The Spanish government have actually issued a card, and by the way, it is green to British people living in Spain. But you know, we're back to a situation where everybody's going to do their own thing and bilateral agreements, and it's very wasteful, it's very inefficient, it creates anxiety for people about the future. Why don't we just say, look, you know, why don't we create something where we can just get a good solution for everybody? And by the way, it already exists. It's called the European Union. It makes life more easier for us, more practical. We all face the challenge of COVID. We all face many challenges. Life is difficult, complex, has its twists and turns. The point about the European Union isn't to create some great behemoth that's going to tell us what to do. It's to just make our daily lives a little bit easier and less complicated. And just how difficult and complicated life becomes when you don't have the thin veneer of that European citizenship is well demonstrated by the experience of EU citizens living in the UK, Britain and abroad, and we help them to tell their story, to empower them, and we hope that one day things will change for the better. But for now, we've all been tipped a little bit into the sea, and it's absolutely shocking, and I'm ashamed of the way the British government has behaved. But we must keep working for justice and for a fair solution, and to sort this out so that people can get back to their daily lives and to their families and the communities and running their businesses and what they want to do without this terrible distraction of Brexit.
I would like to thank you very much, both. And actually, Dr. MacShane, I have the answer. The Greek government, the Greek parliament actually recognized officially the Armenian genocide in 1996. The information was provided kindly from our communications officer, George Papachristou, who was doing the research while we were on live. Good. So hopefully one day the same thing will happen here in the UK as well. I would like to thank you both very much for your time, and thank everyone who attended and contributed, and the ladies as well for reading the questions, Kiki and Maria Dimitra. And I give back to George to finish.
Thank you indeed from me too for all your contributions today. Dennis and Roger, you have been very kind and generous with your time. We've been very fortunate to have had you here with us to share your insights. And I think when it comes to the general, you know, and your viewpoints and your experiences, when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, I think what we've seen today, listening to your views and your responses, you know, in the aggregate, it just goes to show how complex the geopolitical environment it is that underpins the recent events in the Eastern Mediterranean. So thank you for it. And I think since we have been suggesting books today, it just so happens I've just started reading a book on the Turkish invasion of Cyprus called A Watermelon, a Fish and a Bible, written by Christy Lefteri, which is a very exciting and interesting read into, you know, the events that led up to the, you know, during the Turkish invasion. So yeah, I do recommend that one too as well. So I think, so with this, we can conclude our discussion. Thank you very much all. For those interested, we will be uploading a link, a YouTube link on our social media pages. So it will be accessible to many of our friends in the future as well. And we do hope to see you all again.